There are promises we make as children that seem simple at the time. Promises that feel like ordinary requests from parents who want us to be responsible. And when Emma Rodriguez was 8 years old, her father, Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, sat her down 3 days before deploying to Iraq in 2006 and made her promise to take care of his cat, a massive orange Maine Coon named Captain, who had been with Carlos since before Emma was born. And Emma made that promise easily, made it the way children make promises without understanding their weight. And for 15 years she kept that promise, kept it through childhood and adolescence and into adulthood, kept Captain fed and healthy and loved. And she thought the promise was about responsibility, thought her father had wanted to teach her about commitment, caring for another living thing. And it was not until Captain was 17 years old and dying, not until Emma was 23 and sitting in a veterinary office holding a cat who had been part of her entire life, that she finally understood what her father had actually asked her to promise, finally understood why Carlos had made an 8-year-old girl swear on everything she loved that she would keep this specific cat alive for as long as possible. Carlos Rodriguez had adopted Captain in 2003 when the cat was 6 months old, had adopted him from a shelter in El Paso, Texas, where Carlos was stationed before Emma was born. And according to family stories that Emma had heard dozens of times, Carlos had not planned to adopt the cat that day, had gone to the shelter looking for a dog, something that could go running with him, something that matched the active lifestyle of a young soldier. And he had walked past the cat kennels on his way to the dog section and had seen this orange kitten, this massive ball of fur with paws too big for his body, sitting perfectly still and staring at Carlos with an intensity that made Carlos stop walking. And the shelter volunteer had said that cat has been here for 4 months. Nobody wants him because he is too aloof, too independent, does not act like a kitten. And Carlos had opened the kennel, and the cat had walked directly to him and headbutted his hand once, and Carlos had said, "I will take him." Emma was born a year later, born in 2005, and her earliest memories included Captain, included this enormous orange cat who was always present, always watching, always seeming to know when Emma needed something before she knew herself. And Carlos used to joke that Captain had appointed himself Emma's guardian, had decided that this small human was his responsibility. And Emma would tell stories later about how Captain slept outside her bedroom door every night, how he would alert her parents if Emma cried, how he seemed to count the people in the house and would meow persistently if someone was missing. And her mother Maria said that Captain had anxiety, said the cat needed everyone accounted for, needed his family together. If you have ever made a childhood promise that turned out to mean something completely different than you understood, subscribe to this channel right now, because what Emma discovered 15 years after making that promise will prove that sometimes parents see futures we cannot imagine and prepare us for losses we do not know are coming. Hit that like button if you believe that some animals are placed in our lives for reasons we only understand later. And drop a comment telling me what city and country you are watching from, because this story belongs to everyone who has ever kept a promise without knowing its true purpose. The deployment in 2006 was Carlos's second tour to Iraq, was supposed to be a standard 12-month rotation, and 3 days before he left, Carlos sat Emma down in the living room, and Captain immediately jumped into Emma's lap, seemed to sense that something important was happening. And Carlos said, "Emma, I need you to promise me something very important." And Emma remembered being excited because promises felt grown up, felt like her father was trusting her with something real. And Carlos said, "I need you to promise that you will take care of Captain, that you will make sure he has food and water, and that you will play with him and pet him, and that you will keep him healthy and alive for as long as you possibly can." And Emma said, "Of course, Daddy, I promise." And Carlos said, "No, Emma, I need you to really promise. I need you to swear on everything you love that you will do this." And 8-year-old Emma had been confused by the intensity, but had sworn, had put her hand on her heart and promised. Carlos came home from that deployment 11 months later, came home with a traumatic brain injury from an improvised explosive device blast that had killed 2 members of his convoy. Came home different in ways that the family struggled to understand. And Emma remembered that her father was quieter after that deployment, was more distant, would spend hours sitting in the backyard with Captain in his lap. And Maria told Emma that Daddy is having a hard time, that war changes people, that they needed to be patient and loving. And Emma tried to be good, tried to make her father smile, and the only time Carlos seemed fully present was when he was with Captain, would talk to the cat in a low voice, would hold conversations that Emma could not quite hear. The second deployment came in 2008, came when Emma was 10. And again Carlos sat her down before leaving, and again he made her promise about Captain, made her swear that she would keep the cat alive and healthy. And this time Emma said, "Daddy, I already promised. I am taking good care of Captain." And Carlos said, "I know, sweetie, but I need you to promise again. I need to hear you say it." And Emma promised again, promised with the solemnity that her father seemed to need. And Carlos deployed and came back 10 months later, and again he was different, was harder, was more removed. And again, the only constant was Captain, was this orange cat who seemed to be the only thing that kept Carlos tethered to the family. Emma was 12 when she started to notice that her father's relationship with Captain was unusual, was deeper than normal pet ownership, and she would find Carlos sitting with the cat at 3 in the morning, would find him in the dark holding Captain and crying silently. And once Emma asked her mother why Daddy loves Captain so much, why the cat seems more important than anything else. And Maria had looked sad and said, "I think Captain reminds your father of something. Reminds him of a time before the war." And Emma accepted this explanation because she was 12 and did not understand trauma, did not understand that some people need anchors to pull them back from places their minds go. The third deployment happened in 2010, happened when Emma was 14. And by then the ritual was familiar, was Carlos sitting Emma down and making her promise again about Captain, making her swear she would keep the cat alive. And Emma was old enough now to find it strange, was old enough to ask, "Why, Daddy, why is this so important to you?" And Carlos had looked at her for a long time and said, "Because Captain knows things, because he remembers things, I need him to remember." And Emma had not understood what that meant. But she had promised anyway, had promised because her father was going back to war, and promises felt like the only thing she could give him. Carlos came home from that deployment and did not go back, came home and medically retired from the Army with full disability for post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, came home and struggled to adjust to civilian life in ways that frightened Emma, in ways that made Maria cry when she thought Emma could not hear. And Carlos started seeing therapists and attending support groups and taking medications that made him tired and distant. And through all of it, Captain was there, was constantly at Carlos's side. And Emma noticed that her father would have panic attacks and Captain would appear, would press against Carlos and purr, and somehow Carlos would calm down, would breathe through whatever was crushing him. Emma went to college in 2014, went to University of Texas at Austin, and she visited home every few weeks. And each time she came home, her father would ask about Captain, would ask if Emma was remembering her promise, and Emma would assure him that Mom was taking excellent care of Captain, that the cat was healthy and fine. And Carlos would relax visibly, and Emma started to understand that her promise had become something her father held on to, had become a contract that gave him some kind of peace, and she honored it even when it seemed excessive, even when her college friends thought it was weird that she called home specifically to check on a cat. The decline started in 2018, started when Captain was 15 and Carlos was 42, and both of them were slowing down, both moving more carefully, both showing their age and their accumulated damage. And Maria told Emma that the doctors said Carlos's traumatic brain injury was progressing, was causing memory problems and mood changes, and that they were trying different medications, but nothing seemed to help. And Emma came home more frequently, came home and saw her father and Captain sitting together for hours, two battle-scarred creatures who seemed to speak a language only they understood. Emma graduated college in 2019 and moved back to El Paso. Moved back because Maria needed help caring for Carlos. And Emma got a job teaching elementary school and moved into her childhood home. And she was there every day watching her father struggle with memories that seemed to both torture and escape him, watching him forget conversations and appointments and names. But he never forgot Captain, never forgot to check on the cat, never forgot Emma's promise, and Emma started to feel the weight of that promise differently, started to understand that keeping Captain alive was somehow keeping her father alive. By 2020, Captain was 17 and Carlos was struggling with most daily activities, was forgetting family members sometimes, was having episodes where he did not recognize his surroundings, and the doctor said the brain injury combined with the post-traumatic stress disorder had created a degenerative condition, had created something that would not improve, and Emma watched her father disappear in increments, watched him lose pieces of himself, and the only constant was that he knew Captain, always knew the cat, would reach for Captain even when he did not reach for Emma or Maria. Captain started having health problems in early 2021, started having kidney issues that required special food and medications, and the veterinarian said at 17, this is expected, said they could manage it for a while, but Emma should prepare for the reality that Captain was elderly and would not live forever. And Emma started spending hundreds of dollars on veterinary care, started administering medications twice daily, started doing everything possible to keep the promise she had made when she was 8 years old. And when Maria asked if maybe they should consider quality of life, should consider that the cat might be suffering, Emma said no, said I promised. Daddy, said I have to keep Captain alive as long as I possibly can. In March 2021, Carlos had a major medical episode, had a seizure that resulted from his brain injury, and he was hospitalized for a week. And when he came home he was significantly worse, was confused most of the time, was requiring full-time care, and hospice was mentioned for the first time, and Emma refused to accept it, refused to believe her father was dying, and she focused on Captain, focused on keeping the cat healthy, because somewhere in her mind she believed that, if Captain was alive her father would stay alive, that the promise and the cat and her father were all connected. Captain stopped eating in July 2021, stopped eating and lost weight rapidly, and the veterinarian said his kidneys were failing, said they could try aggressive treatment, but at his age the prognosis was not good, and Emma authorized everything. Authorized treatments and hospitalization and procedures that cost thousands of dollars. And Maria said, Emma, honey, we cannot save him forever. The cat is 17 years old and ready to go. And Emma broke down crying and said, I promised. I have to keep him alive. Daddy made me promise. And Maria held her and said, sweetheart, I think maybe the promise has been kept long enough. Emma brought Captain home from the veterinary hospital with instructions for end-of-life care, brought him home knowing they had days, not weeks. And she brought Captain to her father who was in bed, who was barely conscious most days, and she placed the cat on Carlos's chest the way Carlos used to hold Captain. And her father opened his eyes and looked at the cat and said, thank you for keeping him safe. Thank you for giving him more time. And Emma said, Daddy, I do not understand why this was so important. Why you made me promise this when I was 8. And Carlos looked at her with a clarity he had not shown in months, and said, because he holds my memories, because the things I cannot remember, he remembers for me, because as long as he is alive, the person I was before the war is alive. Emma sat with that statement for a long moment, sat there holding her dying cat and watching her dying father, and she understood finally that the promise had never been about responsibility or teaching her to care for animals. The promise had been about Carlos needing someone to protect the last piece of himself that was not broken by war, needing someone to keep alive the companion who had known him before the explosions and the death and the brain injury. And Captain had been a living repository of Carlos's pre-war self. had been the only thing that connected the soldier who adopted a kitten in 2003 to the broken man who came home from Iraq. And by keeping Captain alive, Emma had kept that connection alive, had given her father an anchor to who he used to be. Captain died on July 28, 2021. Died peacefully in Emma's arms with Carlos's hand resting on his fur. And Carlos died 6 days later on August 3rd. Died as if he had been waiting for permission, as if Captain's death had released him from something he had been holding on to. And at the funeral, multiple veterans from Carlos's unit approached Emma and told her that her father had talked about Captain constantly during deployments, had shown pictures, had said the cat was his reason for coming home, and Emma understood. That she had kept a promise that was bigger than she knew, had protected something sacred for 15 years, had given her father a thread to hold on to when everything else was unraveling. And if this story has shown you that sometimes the promises we make as children turn out to be the most important promises of our lives, subscribe to this channel for more true stories about the animals who carry pieces of us when we cannot carry them ourselves. Hit that like button if you believe that some bonds transcend explanation, and leave a comment sharing a promise you kept without fully understanding why, because these stories matter. These moments when we realize that what seemed simple was actually profound matter. And I will see you in the next story.